All right. So first of all, thank you for having me in here. This is my second time in Florence, and this city has a little bit of a special meaning for me because the first time I was here was with this lady, and it was our honeymoon. Yeah. So that picture has 14 years, like in 2002, 14 years, and it is taken in the surroundings of a cathedral. It was an amazing honeymoon. We did a nice, trip with a motorbike from Barcelona to south of France, then to Venice, Florence, Pisa. Super, super nice honeymoon. So I was yesterday sightseeing and going through the center. If you have not had the opportunity to visit this thing, I totally encourage you to do it. It's impressive. Impressive the art in itself, and also the story behind it, and the story behind the man. Yeah, breathtaking. So, walking around yesterday, good memories from the surroundings of the cathedral, and yeah, very happy to be here. Okay, so as many of you, I've been programming for a while, and I have read quite a bit of source code, in either in my work as a consultant or doing open source. And with time, you develop, some preferences or some intuitions about what makes good software in general, So sometimes those intuitions are about high-level things like how do you organize things, APIs, that kind of thing. And sometimes also your preferences or, they converge to small things, to small details in every programming language, And this talk is going to be about those, those little tiny things that sometimes make a difference, And there's going to be opinions in this talk. There's going to be opinions. And I want to do a little warning before we start about these kind of things, about opinions and reasoning about these things. And this is the point. Explaining why we prefer something is different than proving that something is the best choice. And sometimes when we discuss, or, we word things as if we were in the one in the bottom. Like, we word things saying, since A, B, and C, therefore, it follows logically that we should do this, or that this is the best option for this thing we are discussing. And that's often not the case, because life is not an axiomatic system. So what you are really normally doing is like, you have your own background, your own trade-offs, your own, tastes, and given that sort of things, then it's natural for you to prefer something. But the problem is that your brain is not the brain of the other one. So the other one has other trade-offs, other preferences, It has a different brain, and it works differently. So for that other person, so the intersection is not perfect, You have different backgrounds, and so it is not logically following from what you say, but it goes the other way around. What you say normally, is just a consequence of your own way to see life. And I'm going to show that with this example. Let's go with code, because what I said is, something more generic. It applies probably to more, more context than programming. But let's go with programming. We have this snippet with a hash literal, and then we have another option here. And do you see where is the difference? Anyone? In the comma, all right? And some people is going to feel some tension here. All right, so we have the same thing with comma and the same thing without comma, and then moves people, inside. So what's the point here? it is one option better than the other one? It depends on everyone. So, for instance, people that prefer the one at the bottom, they value things like symmetry, like I have the comma in everywhere that, that relaxes my mind. And for instance, it is easier to add something to that hash. If you add something, the patch, it's only that line instead of that line, in addition to the comma that I added to the previous one. So those are pros, if you believe that they are pros, all right? Because the people that prefer the one at the top, they don't see any benefit in those arguments. So for them, what for they have more weight is that they perceive a missing element in the hash at the bottom, and that's a mismatch for them. So they perceive a missed element, and that has more weight for them than the other things that they say, but I don't care. The patch has a comma. Well, that's a patch. It's okay. I added the comma. It's correct. I prefer to have those things than to have this feeling. All right? So no correct answer here. It depends on everyone. And when you write your own code, you follow your preferences, of course. And when you are in a team, you have to, to discuss and reach an agreement. And I believe that for many things, these kind of things just doesn't matter. So, yeah, so when we discuss it's good to acknowledge that there's some subjectivity in what we say, and, So, putting sometimes, in my opinion, for me, my experience, my view, that helps, put some perspective in the discussion. And in particular, this entire talk is going to be deliberate, in my view, right? So I will try to, to use this in the slides, but otherwise you have like a global block that, that ensures that that's the way I want to transmit what I want to transmit. Also, I'm going to enable speculation mode. So, so sometimes I'm going to speculate. I believe that this could be for this reason or that other reason. And enabling speculation mode allows me, to freely, speculate, and that's fine, okay? All right. Let's start with concise code. I looked for a generic definition of conciseness using few words, not including extra or unnecessary information. Conciseness. And we as programmers identify conciseness, in some constructs. For instance, by the way, all the snippets that we are going to see in this talk are real. So no, extracted from open source code or client work or whatever. Not mentioning the source, it doesn't matter, but they are not made up, okay? So I wanted to discuss over real examples. Here we have remotes, which is supposed to be some collection that we sort, and then we take the last element, okay? We have a word for that thing, which is to take the max, okay? So we are sorting and then taking the last one. That makes you think a little bit. So you have to infer. It's not clear in the code. You have to infer. You have to think for a moment that sorting and last, that's like taking the max. So much more concise to say directly the max. You are telling to the reader of the code exactly what is the intention of that line. That's more concise. Normally, conciseness translates to these things. Often means choosing the most specific API for the thing that you want to express. Normally, they involve less code. Oftentimes, the code is more clear, and I am, qualifying every single item, but because this is not 100%. Sometimes there are trade-offs, but oftentimes that's the case. You apply Occam's razor. You apply Occam's razor in several levels. Like, first, what you want to express is exactly you know, what is being written, then for the reader of the code, they have to think less, generally speaking. And also for the libraries, if you are able to express exactly what you need, in general, the library is able to have like the most specific implementation for that specific problem, all right? And that normally yields better performance. So for instance, here, in the previous slide, we had to sort and to take the last. That's much more expensive than taking the max, okay? So there are like several benefits going on here, all related to conciseness, okay? It is shorter, it has better performance, it communicates better, all right? Let's look at this one. Options keys include page. We have an API for that, which is asking for the key, all right? Again, here we have options keys that is building an array, and then we have the predicate. We already have a predicate to ask exactly for that thing. In this one, you have to parse with your brain 3 lines and realize, okay, we are dumping the contents of whatever it's in the content variable into that file, all right? We are dumping the content in that file. And you have to, you know, to look at these 3 lines and realize that. And since 1.9, I believe we have an API that says exactly that. File, write that thing, done. You have to think less, you communicate better, all right? This one, I see it quite often, to my surprise, in Rails applications. I believe, and that's, you know, making use of the speculation mode that I enabled, I believe that people writing this are mostly thinking in SQL. So this call kind of translates almost directly to SQL, right? It's like writing a select with a where, you know? You see there the select with a where. It's quite direct. But when you are using active record, you cannot compare the one in the top with the one in the bottom. Use of the post, boom. It's working at the domain level, you know? That's the API that idiomatically you use in active record. More about conciseness. This one, in this one, name is a string. So the variable has a string object stored in it. And you sometimes see people interpolating something that it is already a string. So no need to do that, okay? It's already a string, done. And in the particular case of putS, in addition to that, calls toS on whatever object you pass, which is the same thing that the interpolation is doing in the object. So in the case of putS, it's even less, you know, it has, it is less logically, I need to find the word in English, but it is much more redundant than the first one than the second one, okay? And my hypothesis here is that maybe you are used to see visually string literals. So putS, maybe you have a connection with the literal, and putS, you know, visually matches with a double quote or single quote or whatever. In this case, we need a double quote. And, you know, it's automatic. You follow, you know, that connection and write a string literal because you are used to see string literals together with putS. I don't know, could be. But the thing is that you do not need it. This is another common one. You want to call a method whose name is dynamic, okay? And that's constructing a symbol with a symbol that corresponds with the method name. to do that, you use this syntax that allows you to build symbols with whatever, with whatever characters you want. So it's colon, and then we interpolate method name into the literal. Another option is to call to sim here, but send does not need a symbol. Then the method is fine with a string, so no need to force a symbol there. Again, oftentimes you call send with methods that you know beforehand. One canonical use is, well, for many years, include has been a private method. So it was very common to see, if you want to dynamically include a module into something, you wrote send colon, and then idiomatically use a symbol, send colon include whatever, all right? So maybe you have that association that with send and symbols, or I don't know, or maybe you just do not know that send, accepts strings. But yeah, but it does, and that's enough. This is checking if the Ruby platform constant matches Java. That is doing a bunch of things. So it is building a regular expression. To match that, we need to run that with the regular expression engine. And then it has a number of side effects, like setting, $ampersand and $backquote, and it has side effects that they are not obvious in the source code because they are side effects. But indeed, you are doing all those things with this line of code. In 2.4, there's going to be something a little bit more concise, which is the match predicate. The match predicate, it goes the other way around. Okay, so you have the regular expression as a receiver, and the match predicate, it does not have side effects. So it is not setting, those variables. If you have captures, they are not going to be in $1, $2, that kind of thing. And as a consequence of that, is like 2-3 times faster than this one is 2 or 3 times faster than the first one. But still, why are we building a regular expression here? Because we have a predicate for doing that, which is include. Okay, so we have an API that says exactly, does this string include this other string? Done. And this example for me shows some tension that I believe sometimes you find, because you could argue that the third one is more concise, but maybe a part of us is thinking that the first one is actually easier to read. So bottom one, more concise, and indeed that's the one that I normally choose. But you have to admit that maybe the first one is more clear. It reads, there's less things, there's, I don't know, less characters, less symbols, I don't know. And yeah, it is doing a number of things, and that line is not as direct, I would say, that the third line. But when you see the first line, you are not really thinking about all these steps, like I am building a regular expression, and then that's going to go through a regular expression engine, and you do not you parse that as a unit, I believe. You see it, and instantly you see there string inclusion actually. And for instance, languages that do not have those predicates and have to write things like this, if you are a programmer using this language, and you are proficient in that language, I would say that you do not parse this with the individual pieces. So you are not parsing this as index of, I am getting an index that is -1 if it's not present, otherwise, and since false and true work this way, you do not do it that way. I believe that if you are proficient in this particular, in this kind of languages, you understand that as a unit. When you see if this one, your brain, it's working in the unit. And you know that's a string inclusion. You do not, do all the individual steps in your head. Another one, there's a redundant self here. Okay, so raise something if self response body. No need to do that. Okay? Get rid of the self. This one is common. This is the kind of code that you write when you are, building a singleton. And new is not special in any way in Ruby. It's just a regular method. So the same rule that applies to, to the everyday methods, let's say, applies to new. It's not special. So no need to put a self there. Another one that is very common is the first one, self-ID. For some reason, in active record code, you often see self-ID. So if you realize in this line, there are two methods being called. One is ID, the other one is name. And for some reason, whoever wrote this put a self in the ID, but did not put the self in the name. And they are the same thing. All right? It's curious, right? I wonder if the reason is that ID is maybe too short, and you wanted to, to make it a little bit more, apparent or something. I don't know. Maybe just in case ID is a special method in object, I don't know. Let's play safe. I don't know. I don't know why, but you find self often used with ID. No need. You can. I mean, this is the consistent line. Don't use selves. And a question to ponder: is redundancy perceived in a universal way? So we are removing self, right? Is this redundancy something universal? No. So the Python people do not believe that redundancy has to be get rid of. Why? Again, because we have like two angles seeing the same objective thing, which is whether we put a self or not. Several communities look at the same problem in totally different ways. So what we perceive as a community, and I believe that's not something objective. That's something that goes within the culture of the language. So when you join the community, they are like social rules that are into the way you write things, right? So you see that in the Ruby community, that's perceived as a redundancy, and that you are not supposed to write self. Otherwise, your code is not idiomatic. Okay, so you try to match and be fluent with that language. And being fluent means writing idiomatic code, and that's the code that you are supposed to write, idiomatic code. All right, so Python people, they perceive implicitness in those missing selves, all right? Implicitness, where we see redundancy, they see implicitness. That's what has weight for them. There are different weights. So they prefer being explicit. We say being redundant, in Ruby at least, but they say we prefer to be explicit. So in Python, in case you don't know, you have no option. You have to write self. It's not optional. So self for methods, local variables do not have self. Done. Clear. A clear rule. All right? So if you see Python code is full of selves, because every single method call needs a self. It is one better than the other? I think there's no answer to that. It depends, again, on your background, your preferences, and maybe you are more close to the way Python people interpret it. Maybe you are more close to the Ruby way. But, there's no answer to that, I believe. OK. Let's go now for readable code. Another generic definition, let's say, enjoyable and easy to read. I like the qualification of enjoyable. Let's go through this one. I don't know, but it takes me a while to process this. So, first thing, in general, people are not good, or we are not good at negations in general. For some reasons, our brain is not like just a logical machine that flips and flops. So yeah, so it is a fact that for us, negation has a cost, a mental cost. So that negation there, if we can get rid of that negation, it's better for the reader of the code. So fortunately, we have a predicate that is positive. It's the same thing, but it is positive. So this second one, it's easier to read. You see that I am putting a lot of emphasis about reading the code, not only about expressing yourself, but reading the code. Because the point there is that when anyone is going to read that code and someone is going to do it, maybe you, maybe another one, that you can understand that better, And for some people, me include, unless has also some mental cost. So maybe because I am not a native English speaker, I don't know, but unless makes me think more than if, because it has like an implicit negation. Unless, we are seeing there the condition that has to happen for not doing the other thing. Yeah. So if you dedicate a couple of seconds, you get it, But it's not like so straight as an if. And I know that for some people, unless does not have that cost. Sometimes, so in the past, I asked it in Twitter, and some people said, no, for me, same cost. Okay. Yeah. So for some people, it has cost. For other people, it does not have. But we can write this one, So boom, it's easy. Return ID if name blank. Everything is positive. And that's easier to understand generally. And maybe also more straight to express. Although you have to be, in order to write the third one and not the first one, there's something that has to happen, that is that you are constantly vigilant about about trying to find, the most concise thing. And that takes some time. That takes, some being aware of every single thing that you write. Escape it backslashes, bad thing. Don't do that. So this is a regular expression, for in this case URLs, and we have, these backslash slashes, and that also happens, in places where the slashes are common, like file paths or whatever. Okay. So Ruby has alternative delimiters for this kind of, regular expressions, strings, and other things. So in general, if you can avoid backslashes in a string or regular expressions literals better because they read just like they are, okay? So the meta characters are just there and done, you know? There's nothing in your brain that, you know, for your brain to, you know, to interpret and, you know, undo and that kind of thing. And if you want to go a little bit funky, you can, you know, also use this kind of thing that arguably is maybe even lighter than the second one, okay? But yeah, but this maybe it's a little bit in the border, I don't know. Second one would be maybe more common, let's say. But the point is avoid backslashes if you can. Just reads better. This one, man, I have suffered so much with this one. So expand path and then, you know, colon, in this case, bootrb is going to require a file called bootrb. And this path is relative to this pseudo constant, call it __ file. Okay. Okay, so this hurts for me. So the colon for me is associated to directories. So I have a directory, colon is the parent of the directory. That's, you know, that's the way the universe goes, you know, is like this. So we are doing here colon of a file. Doesn't match. Colon of a file is the directory where that file is contained. So, so maybe it's not obvious, but we are loading here a file that is in the same directory of the current file. If I am in the same directory, this colon thing, I don't know, doesn't work for me. And fortunately, since in Ruby 2.0, we got _ dir. Oh, now it's more clear. All right? So relative to this directory, which is the directory of the current file, load bootrb. Good, you know, let's hopes. All right? And what I'm saying applies to expand path generally. And in particular case of require, we still have, since 1.9, I believe, require relative, which is, you know, way even more, you know, obvious than the second one. Require relative is direct, all right? In the middle one, you have to, again, you have to infer. You have to read the code and say, okay, I am loading, you know, the thing in the same directory, more things to think. Require relative is just direct. And you know this quote, all right? Always quote as if the guy who ends up maintaining your code will be a violent psychopath who knows where you live. And then there's this other one that says the maintainer of this code could be your future self. But for my taste, those are like two self-centered codes. I just like to phrase it like this. Think of the readers of your code. Just that's it. You know, when you are programming, think that someone is going to need to understand that code. Not because of you, because you'll be gone someday, but because of them, because of the maintainers. So write readable code and document the whys in code comments. That's main. That's, I don't know. If you ever have had to get, you know, some legacy code, some, I don't know, to maintain something that other people had written, and it was not documented. By documented, I do not mean like a Word document, you know, with sections and bold. No, I mean, you know, why this piece of code is strange. Unless you have the context I have in my mind when I'm writing this, you are not going to understand why we are doing this. And if the person that wrote it is gone and you inherit that code, man, you do not know why you are doing that. You do not know whether you can get rid of that. Maybe it was a quick fix for something that you deployed and could be removed like 2 weeks later, but nobody did it. So you carry that uncertainty, you carry the tests of that, you know, and it's a mess. So document the whys, not because of you, because you'll be gone, but because of them. And That's because of the greatest of the qualities a programmer can have, in my view, which is empathy. So empathy can be expressed in a number of ways. You can show empathy, in the way you relate with other people. You can show empathy in the way you review code in GitHub, in meetings, Slack. But for me, the ultimate, expression of empathy in a programmer is the way they program, thinking about the rest of the people, the ones that are going to maintain that code. But I'm digressing, so let's go for another one. This one is about ordering things naturally. So in this example, we have a method defined last name and then first name. And normally you read code top to bottom. So when you read the first one, last name, your brain for a little moment goes like, last name, where's the first name? And there's that little moment, and then maybe you see that below there's a first name. Okay, I make sense of this. But, if you just write it the natural way, first name first, last name later, it flows, all right? Here we're declaring some timestamps. And delete that, created that, updated that. Almost. That's not the natural cycle of an object. The natural cycle of an object is you first create it, then maybe you modify it, then maybe you delete it. All right? So, again, flows. All right? This is the, wow. Yeah, your brain relaxes. Okay, go. Another one. Here we have parameters, protocol, host, and port, and then, for some reason, you assigned them in a different way. I don't know. Maybe the port was an addition, in another iteration of this method. Maybe it was an addition, and whoever wrote this just went on the first line, okay, done, assigned here, But if you read this code, your brain starts to do a matrix, right? Okay, port with port, protocol, okay. Seems like everything is in place, okay? But, again, this flows, just follow the natural order. And, yeah, so as I said, concise versus readable, sometimes there's a tension here. There's no, sometimes there's a clear, better way to do something, or, or that most people would agree that it is better in some sense. But sometimes it's not so clear. For instance, we have here a constructor that gets, from some arguments and a name and an email. Okay. Our first reaction here as the programmers is, okay, we have here some duplication. We are calling args twice. The keys are duplicated in the call at the right and the key at the left. We start to check. This could be copy-paste. There's any typo here. Let's double check. Okay, name with name, email with email. Okay, works. So, so we stop here for a moment, checking things. And we have this sensation that we are kind of duplicating something. So in active support, we have slice for hashes. These examples are not equivalent because the slice, if the hash does not have name, for instance, the resulting hash is not going to have the key. So in the first example, the new method is going to receive for certain a name key, and in the second one, it depends on whether the key exists on the hash. But let's suppose, for the sake of the example, that it doesn't matter. So the second one is doing, in a compact way, what we want to do in the top one. So no repetition, no chance for copy paste, no change for, you know, for typos or less change, but you could argue maybe that the first one is easier to read than the second one. Could be. Because the second one, it's a little bit more, I don't know, a little bit more obscure. The first one is obvious. The second one, it's less clear. It's more compact, but it is less straightforward than the first one, I would say. So, more questions than answers, you know? It's a trade-off. Let's see this one. You call super to initialize some variable options, and then in the second line, we modify that is supposed to be a hash, and then, you know, this could be a method. We return these options, or that's the value of the expression in any, you know, anyway. And we have an API for doing exactly that, which is tab. So in tab, with tab, that's precisely what tab is for. So let's call super, and give me this for a moment, that I'm going to do something, and then I'm going to return that value, possibly modify it in place. Okay. So there's tension also here. There's tension because, for instance, I normally would use tab, personally. I would use tab. Why? Because, and that goes to the first slide, I'm going to explain why I prefer tab, not why tab is, you know, globally better than the other one, because that depends on everyone. So why works better for me? Because I am seeing in the bottom one that I am communicating to the reader of the code that I am going to return this thing. So we go top to bottom, and when you see super.tab, you already know that that's going to be the return value. And then you read, what do we do with this? In the first example, you have to infer that. You get a variable, you do stuff, and then, okay, this is the variable that I'm going to return. Okay? That's compressed in the tab idiom. But for some people, this is like too magic. Not magic. Magic is not the word in the sense that this is deterministic and this, you know, it is doing what the API is doing. But the first one is like more straightforward, you know, again. So there's some idiom that is better than the other one? I don't think so. I don't think so. For some people, the first one is, they prefer the first one because they prefer that it is more straightforward. Other people prefer the second one because that sense of conciseness, that sense of expressing and communicating exactly what you're going to do, that has more weight for them. All right. Let's talk now about the third quality, which is being precise. Is and accurate in all its details. I did an experiment a time ago in Active Record, which was to, well, there was this feature that was that after if you did a select and it took more than a certain threshold, it would run explain in the log automatically for you. All right, that was called auto explain. I wrote that. And this threshold, I did an experiment, which was to put the units in the variable. So to explain threshold in seconds. Okay? It is a little bit longer, but it's much more precise. Much more precise meaning that when you see that in a config file, it is obvious which is the unit. And with thresholds in particular, this is sometimes not so clear. Actually, I worked it in a small bank a few days ago where the threshold was being computed in seconds, but then it was used as if it was milliseconds. and you couldn't see the mismatch because the variable was in one place and then used in another place. And so when you configure that, the unit is obvious. No need to check the API, no need to do anything. It's right there in the name of the variable. And then when you read the implementation of this and you see auto-explain threshold in seconds, in some other file inside active record, very far away from the configuration file, man, it's clear, seconds, okay? If you got milliseconds, you have to handle it, So I would argue that this is more precise. Has many comments. When I do a review of a Rails application, that's one of the first things that I check. I grab the models folder, checking for has many comments, has many associations that do not have a dependent option. And I always find some, always, because it's very easy to forget to add the dependent option. And if you do not add the dependent option, active record does nothing. So you get an orphan record, okay? Okay. This one is logging into standard output using the constant. And if you want to be a good Ruby citizen, it's better to use the global variable instead of the constant. So in case someone does not have this fresh, the constant has the original stream that the process got. That's the original one. But then there's a global variable where you can change this stream normally temporarily, all right? So standard output always refers to that first, the original stream, but then in the program, you're supposed to use the global variable because someone could be changing that and you have to follow that. So for instance, when you do print, it prints to the global variable, not to the constant. Put S to the global variable, not to the constant. And for instance, one canonical use case for this is capturing a standard output in a test suite. Okay, so the way you do that is you assign to standard output the global variable string IO, and then you do that in a block or something so that it's temporary, run the code, and all the code that is printing to the global variable, which is idiomatically what the code prints to, is going to be printing actually to your string IO. When the code is done, you reassign the standard output to whatever value it had before this trick, and then you inspect string IO that has captured everything. So it's more healthy to use the global variable. And now, since we are talking precision, let's talk about regular expressions. Some people, when confronted with a problem, think, I know, I use regular expressions, and know they have two problems. There's a very well-known saying, and again, I think that's bullshit. Bullshit. So regular expressions are a powerful tool. You have totally to master them as a programmer, all right? At least in my opinion. It's bullshit in my opinion, okay? Okay, this is a very common gotcha in Ruby. Let's say this is validating a username, all right? So we have an anchor that that anchors at the beginning, then a dollar that anchors at the end, and then some allowed characters in between. Okay, so in Ruby, the caret is different from \A. The caret means beginning of a string or beginning of line, whereas \A means beginning of a string, period. Okay, so you can get this injected, and it's going to match. Some, payload there, then a new line, and then a valid username. Since our regular expression is anchoring with a caret, it's going to match this, and you get hacked. So use A when you mean A. If you want to match with the beginning of a string, that's it. You do not want more flexibility, just use A. That's what A means. So again, we are writing exactly what we want to mean. The reader of the code is going to see capital A, it's clear. Otherwise, you are wondering, did this person choose caret because it is allowed to have this matching in intermediate new lines or not? It is an overlook or it is not. Okay, so be precise. Sometimes, if you are writing a quick and dirty script for yourself, doing, I don't know, whatever, okay, you can relax maybe. But if you are writing like, production code, a gem, let's say this is globbing, something, and it's iterating through the results of the glob, and checks if the file name starts with something. Okay, question: Can a file name have new lines? If this is for me and I know my file system, maybe it's okay. If this goes in a gem that is going to be used in the while, can have new lines, cannot have new lines? Okay, that's the problem. Just do not wonder. Do not wonder. Why wonder? Just write capital A. Okay? And indeed, it can have new lines. But I had to check for this talk. I didn't know it. Okay. Similarly, dollar is even a little bit more complicated because dollar means end of a string or end of line, but allows an optional trailing new line character. So it is not exactly end of a string. End of a string is lowercase z. Lowercase z. So the stricter pay is capital A, lowercase z. That's what says beginning of a string, end of a string, period. No, nothing allowed, nothing optional, no new lines, anything. That's exactly what they mean. And I see this often misused in Ruby. And the reason is that I believe the anchor normally matches beginning of a string, unless you activate a flag. That's what happens in many programming languages. So the problem is that in many programming languages, in many regular expression literals, the anchor actually means beginning of a string, and you have to activate something to make it make it match in intermediate new lines. And similarly, the dollar normally matches at the end of a string with an optional new line. Okay, if what you are validating in the case that it is a validation does not allow an optional new line, do not admit an optional new line. Okay? But normally it means end of a string unless you activate something, and that happens in Perl, Python, and I don't know. That's the most common interpretation. So we are exposed to a big number of regular expressions that use the caret and the dollar in that sense, in Stack Overflow, in books, in whatever, So we expose a lot to common idioms that use the caret and the dollar in that sense. So when we are writing Ruby, we have constantly to remember that Ruby is exceptional in that sense. And Ruby, so the other languages have a way to activate multi-line mode, but Ruby does not even have a way to disable it. So that's how it works, right? And again, more questions than answers. It could be argued that the first one reads a little bit better than the second one. It's a tiny detail, it's a nuance, but I would say that the first one reads better. So the first one reads better, but it is the incorrect one, whereas the second one is the correct one if you want to anchor precisely at the end of a string, but maybe it has a little bit more mental cost. Tiny, but it's there. Okay? So there you have it. And I would like to have some final words about code style. And except for the first slide where we saw the two options for writing a hash literal, the talk has not talked about code style at all. Okay, it was everything about using APIs and Ruby idioms, but not about where you put a curly, where you put a comma, or if when has to go with case. That kind of thing is not this talk about. So, indeed, I believe with time, I believe that code style, the particular rules of a style guide, in my view, do not matter. So, for instance, this style of declaring method, call it the Seattle Ruby style, where you do not put parentheses. For me, that's hard to read. I am used to define methods with parentheses and to read code that defines methods with parentheses. When I find code that declares methods without parentheses, it's harder for me to parse. You do it, of course, but I have a mismatch. But with time, I believe that mismatch is not essential. It's not something intrinsic. It's not that this is harder to parse than the other one. It's just that my brain is used to some visual patterns. When that visual pattern does not match your visual pattern, you have your circuits here, that recognize that pattern, you have a mismatch, and it doesn't work for you. But I am convinced that if I start working in a project that has that convention, and I am there like 2-3 weeks, I am done. I will develop, more circuitry, and no problem reading that. So there's a lot of just what you are used to, and in that sense, I do not believe that some, within some reasonable, limits, like do not put your file in one line. I don't know, that within some reasonable limits, I do not believe that particular rules in code style matter too much. I do believe that consistency in a code base, that's better. Because at least if you are in a code base and you go from file to file and it looks the same, then that consistency, I think it's a good thing to do. And I believe the Go community got this right. I mean, in Go, you have strict rules about how you format your code. Done. No discussion. No style guides. We have, it's curious because we have all this flexibility in syntax, and then there's like a circle, because we have the flexibility in syntax. We love it. We think that allows us to express ourselves, in the particular way that we like, but then the community arrives to some style guides, and that's like the community accepted way to format your code. So why do we have the flexibility then to convert to some guidelines? And then those guidelines are never used that way first. They may not exist, and if they exist anyway, every single project that you do is going to have their tweaks that reflect the way the team likes to format the code. So, too complicated. The Go community just, decided for some format rules, done. There's no discussion. And if you jump from project to project, everything looks the same. I think that's a good thing. But in Ruby, things are different, and at least for code consistency within a project, I believe Rubocop has done like a good service in this sense to the community. I see Rubocop more and more used in projects, and yeah, I believe that encourages you to at least settle on some rules, apply them, follow them, and at least in the context of one single project, to try to be consistent, enforcing that in pull requests, and that kind of thing. That's it. Thank you. Okay, so the question was about the two syntaxes that we have for hash literals, at least hash literals that have symbol as keys. We have the new one where you have the key and the colon, and we have the old one, let's say, and the one that works, that only works for so the one that you have to use for hashes whose keys are not symbols, which is the one with the arrow. And the question was what I do normally. Okay, so normally what I do is nowadays I write the new syntax. So if the code is mine, I use the new syntax. Okay. And if the code is mine and I see in old code the previous syntax, I change it. Okay. But if I am in a project that for some reason has the older syntax, like as a project convention, I respect that. And I am fine working with that one. So I have a preference, but fine working with other conventions. Yeah, so the question was, there was on a slide, yeah, that declare three attributes, 3 timestamps, and we had a declaration for each one of them. But that macro, let's say, also accepts that you declare the attributes in one line, right? That was the question, and what?
I would put them.
Yeah.
But not to define that.
Yeah, it could be an alternative. Yes. So since this was, yeah, this was like extracted from real code, and that is the way it was written in the real code. But absolutely, you could do it that way, and the same principle of ordering would apply, I would say. So if you write it in one line, also use the natural order. If you have like one macro call, but several lines for the several attributes with a comma, trailing comma, also, you know, the order. Yeah. Yeah. So the question was, these two snippets, generally speaking, are not equivalent because in the first one, after these 3 lines, options is a variable that exists, whereas in the second one, when the block is over, options is gone. Yes, and there's an assumption in this. So that they are equivalent is an assumption of the slide. So it is like this was, for instance, the body of a method, right? And that's it. But you are right. You do not have options in the 4th line in the second example, and in that case you can assign the result of tap to the variable, and also that's again a trade-off. So assigning something where you have a tap in the right, it's a similar trade-off to the one with methods, okay? It communicates exactly what you are going to do, but I don't know, it's a little bit more, maybe more obscure, I don't know.